Those ones where there are charges laid, and in working with the community in terms of identifying the best processes for them. And and also, you know, if your community wants to establish any type of community-based processes, we will certainly, you know, work with you and support you and advocate and you know, to ensure that those that is sustainable. Because I know that many times, you know, if our community has, well, it's referred to as a peacekeeper program or security, and you know, the searches are conducted there. You know, those individuals, a lot of times they're doing it on a voluntary basis, are, you know, paid, compensated with, you know, not as a full-time job. And also it is a challenge for them to acquire, you know, proper training for them to be kept safe, for them to be able to fulfill that very important role. So, so those are the things that we, you know, will continue to support and, you know, at your, when you place that request with us. And Mike Matata-Wellman, Chair of Nishnawbe Aski Police Services Board, also wanted to add a few comments, and then after that, we would welcome any questions and comments from the delegation.
Machi, good afternoon. Miigwest miniguyan precies niet richt Tiana Montamano Magewa. Naspits is te mistega kusa koskago je kinanano mse ontagaitay. Mse bogo kitestauno kikino kusa semino. As I was listening to the presentations, to the comments, there are many things going through my mind, or my heart was pounding. I'm one of those people that live this, that are currently living this nightmare with our own family, suffering from addictions. As a grandparent today, we have grandchildren in our care. So that's why this thing is near and dear, and also that's why my heart was racing. Unfortunately, the regional chief just left, so I won't say too much, but I want to go back to the years between 2009 2012 when I was one of the deputy grand chiefs. We had submitted a proposal to the Chiefs of Ontario Assembly to approach the Casino Rama dollars. We had a proposal back then, a strategy on how to bring treatment, help to our people. But sadly, it was voted defeated. So in essence, we failed, or I failed, I don't know what to call it. Sadly, it was rejected. So that work back then, had we had funds, who knows what could have been today, I don't know. But just a couple of points I wanted to share was for people that are recovering, for people that are getting the help or accomplishing their efforts to recover, we need to support them. We need to be mindful of them. We need to accommodate them, more or less. Getting the treatment is one thing, but moving on is the other thing. Going from day one to moving forward. That's the challenge that we have for them, with them. what do we do, or what do they do? They can't just sit there. That's why they relapse. We also need to support regional treatment programs. The reason I say that is we are a transient people. We're mobile. Sometimes not of our own choice, but because we're evacuated because of fires or because of flooding. So when you're displaced from your home community and while you're receiving treatment, you're kind of thrown outside to fend for yourself. And that has happened over the years. We've had people evacuated, and those people were scrambling or causing chaos. The other thing, I wanted to acknowledge Ontario. And I hope Dirk can carry the message forward. I want to acknowledge Ontario for all their support. The coroner's office being here. And when I met Dirk back a number of years ago, he was reaching out and said, how can we help? We have not done enough for First Nations communities. So that's how we met. And since then, he's been pretty active, very involved. And presentation is well received. It's a sad story, sad picture. We've lost many in Timmins as well, many friends in Timmins from overdose. And I'm sure it is the same story for you here in Thunder Bay and other smaller urban centers. Again, and with my acknowledgement to Ontario, it's for the funding of the 18 officers to do to implement and carry out the strategy. As our chief of police said, we asked for a higher number, but we got 18. That is good. That is fine. Because we only had 2 officers before. We only had 2 people trying to carry out that strategy. 2 officers in all of the Van territory. So with 18, at least they can work together, coordinate together, plan together, and we are seeing results. So that's what I wanted to say. That's what I wanted to share. Again, there's more to say, lots to say about this. Many things have transpired, and there are treatments that are available now. But like I said, we need support for those people that get the treatment.
So at this time, I'm going to open the floor for questions. Floor recognizes Chief Wesley.
Yesterday, good afternoon. It's very sobering numbers, and you know I truly appreciate what our police force has to contend with on a daily basis, and the lack of resourcing that they have. You know, they do a good job under the circumstances. But yesterday I spoke about potentially an opioid death. I had a woman that was medevaced to regional hospital. Had a brain aneurysm triggered by meth, is my understanding. I'm sad to say that that person will probably not survive. The family is here in the city, you know, doing their usual last visits, and it's very sobering when you think about the impact of the meth crisis and the opioid crisis in our communities. I have a number of times proposed solutions in the last couple of years while we were in the midst of the pandemic. And even at one point, Chief Chief Donnie Morris presented on our behalf a partnership of 4 communities that are affiliated with the Sulaco Friendship Accord. We had outlined a path as to how we can address the crisis that we're in, the addiction crisis. And again, I would like to propose that that is the path forward. Many of our communities have our own solutions. What's lacking is the political and the financial wherewithal to get it done. Not only by us, but by government. The last time a serious effort to address addictions was in the early 90s when solvent abuse was prevalent. That was the last time that something ever happened. And in our presentation, one of the calls that we asked for was an overhaul of the federal and provincial mental health and addictions programs, and the identification and appropriate funding streams to fund the levels of addictions that we have in our communities. And as I said, Chief Morris did that presentation on our behalf. The solution is there. It's the coordinated effort of the various federal and provincial ministries that needs to happen. That really needs to happen. We also need the funding availability to be able to get that job done. The organizational impacts are not just confined to NAPS. They're impact all sectors of our organizations. Everything from children, families, everything. And we have to approach it on a broad scale in order to be able to tackle this problem. And I wanted to propose to the chiefs in Assembly and on behalf of our communities that we have an emergency health summit, mental health and addictions health summit at the very urgent possible time to start pulling together all the federal and provincial organizations that will be applicable to this issue and have that summit and hash out solutions immediately. How many more people will die before we actually do something? There has to be a concerted effort across all levels of government to deal with this issue. In the coming days, there will be more deaths associated with opioids. I'm not going to sit here and let that happen. I don't think any of you want that either. And so that's what I'm proposing, is that we have an immediate mental health and an addiction summit to bring together the people to properly and identify a solution forward. You guys?
Thank you, Chief Wesley.
Thank you very much, Ukama Wesley, for that. The executive is here. You know, there are certain files that we feel that we should all be a part of, and this is one of them. And I'm very thankful that they, you know, trusted me to lead on this, and so we will put that within our plans. I agree, and as I mentioned earlier, you know, the province has identified $3.8 billion on mental health and addictions, and you know, when we reviewed in terms of the investments that have already been in place, you know, there's very little that our people in our communities can access. Yes, if they come to Thunder Bay where they're putting more beds in detox, or if they're going to Sulaco, which I see is one of the plans they have. But yet, you know what, 28 beds that they're proposing is not going to be the solution to be able to, in terms of the population that we have and the impacts of addictions within our communities. And so there has to be, I will look to you and others and within this, at this table, to ensure that this summit does take place, and then when we go to our provincial and federal partners, to ensure that that funds are made available to us to have this particular summit that you have suggested. Thank you.
So we still have time. We had to move the Patty Haidu to 4:15, so we do still have time. Frank McKay, and then
Okay, good afternoon.
Yep.
Good afternoon, chiefs and delegates. I'm Frank McKay, a proxy for Kuchiching, but I'm also on the board of directors of Nishnawbe Aski Police Services, and I just wanted to add a few points in relation to what the NAPS is doing. We've been working with NAPS in relation to the police services in determining how we should approach the directions that we get from the chiefs and councils in relation to how they want to protect and to provide safety for the community members. And one of the things that happens is that there are certain restrictions, or we can't do certain things but follow the law. According to our agreement in the first recital, says that this NAPS Police Services will follow and enforce federal laws, provincial laws, and in the third section it says there, ban council bylaws approved by ISC. Originally, when we first started off, it just says BCRs that prohibited alcohol and drugs, but that portion, that wording of it was struck down by the province. Was struck down by the province because they didn't want to prosecute ban council resolutions anymore. So those areas were struck down at that time, and there was no effort there was no authority for NAPS to be able to be involved in that direction. But we have in the agreement the ban bylaws could be enforced is one of the areas that we could enforce. So we want to, but we wanted to pursue that at a board level, and we at the last negotiations, not just negotiations, we had secured a position called the ban laws in law enforcement and compliance. We wanted to have a person there study the avenues, legal avenues that we would have in relation to enforcing the laws, the community bylaws. We talked about the First Nations jurisdiction in relation to how the chiefs and councils wanted to govern their communities, and that's one of the things that we are lacking, is that we don't have any written bylaw and laws, community laws, that we could get recognition, get the federal provincial governments to recognize those laws, so that we can enforce them. So that's one of the portion of the things that we are looking at also when we talk about the enforcement of drug and alcohol-related offenses that we have. We know that the First Nation communities, have taken steps in relation to how they want to protect their communities, the safety of their communities. They have instituted a security system at the airports and the point of entry in their communities. And we looked at that also because one of our First Nation communities, Satchko Lake First Nations, was taken to court for illegal search and seizure in one of the incidents that happened in our community. And at that time, the judge sided with the First Nation and said, "This is a community law, and it's accepted by the community, and that it could be enforced the way they want to see it enforced." So we wanted to try and build that approach to enforce and assist the community security systems that our communities have established, and to work in collaboration with them, how we can straighten that process out in prohibiting illegal drugs and alcohol to come into our communities. So I just wanted to add that point, and I also wanted to ask the doctor higher in relation to the statistics that he has provided. Those are astounding numbers for our First Nations to realize, to understand, how far we are into this opiate crisis and rising and increasing. And I just wanted to know if what is this authority in relation to providing recommendations to your superiors? I don't know who you report to, but in relation to how our First Nation communities want to develop approaches in relation to preventing these drugs coming into our communities. How can your office assist us, to convince the provincial and federal governments, these strategies that we're developing, community-driven processes, could be supported and encouraged? So that's my question to Dr. Heyer.
Thank you for the question, and thanks to the chair for your comments. Very kind and generous. Our expertise is death investigation, and so we will work with you and work together, as Deputy Grand Chief talked about, at the Mental Health Summit, for example. When that occurs, then we would come and we would bring together our information and illustrate the trends and the patterns. But because we're not experts in management of opioids and addictions and mental health, much of what we bring is our observations. But we would work together to share those observations, walk together with you when you do make presentations for things such as additional officers and the work that would occur. And we bring them to the attention of different governmental organizations through direct communication, through public reporting, and a variety of other responses. So we don't have the answers, unfortunately, but we will work together with others to try to inform those answers.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we do have a question from the virtual forum. Floor recognizes Chief Nakaji. Technicians.
Thank you. The only question I have is the auxiliary program. How is that going? I know it might be us, but I'm just wondering about the auxiliary program. I hardly hear about it, and I know there's people interested in it. So if you could provide that update, it'd be great. Thank you.
I understand the question. So we were having problems with understanding or hearing the question properly. Can you repeat the question? Chief Nakachi, if you can repeat the question.
Okay, I'll say it slowly. I tend to talk fast. So what I'll say is, what I'm asking is about the auxiliary program. Where is it now? And I know I've been approached by a few parents that their children are interested. So if we can just get an update on that. Thank you. Did you hear me that time?
Yeah, thank you, Chief. We did, in years gone by, we did have an auxiliary program, but it was very difficult to maintain for funding as well as just getting the people to do it, and it needs to have management. You can't just throw people into the community, so we're just not there. Would we like to have it? Absolutely. We do have a few cadet programs that we're working with, but as far as auxiliary, that program kind of went away on us. So we do not have any auxiliary at this time, and no plans moving forward that I know of. Thank you.
That's it. Chief Judy Black. We have 2 more comments, then we do have the next presenter on as well. Chief Judy.
I just have a question. I want to know what funds are available within NAN with regards to addictions. Do you have anything in terms of community support? Because what I'm looking for is I'm looking for support, community support, community visits, community workshops. These kind of approaches work, but you need to be consistent. So I'm wondering if you do have funds available within NAN for that, workshops or awareness seminars, that type of thing? And how soon can you visit the communities if so?
Okay, so we have a few sources, not in terms of transferring funds directly to a community, but we do have a few individuals within our community wellness that can conduct workshops. And we also now have a mental health policy analyst under health, and Michelle Hunter, and so she's working with us as well in terms of developing, and also under the NAN Hope, which is also, transitioning to ensure that we can try to, I guess, reach more community-based in terms of development of coping skills. So we have those kind of processes, Chief. Okay, Chief Chichu?
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for your presentation. And also, Police Chief Roland, thank you for what you added to this discussion today. And I feel the same way as Mike, who came up to speak. I lost my youngest brother to opioid overdose about a year and a half ago. It's been a very painful experience for me and my family. We've tried to help him, to intervene many times, and but to no avail. And he was one of the statistics from the doctor had there in Timmins. His overdose took place in Timmins there, and I had to be the one to break the news to my very aging and fragile and not well dad the morning we heard. And eventually I'm the one that did his funeral also. And right in my dad's yard, because of the pandemic restrictions, we put up a tent. And so it's been quite a journey. And so when this topic comes up, my heart is stirred, and I agree with a lot of comments that were made. I appreciate Chief Wesley and bringing up the idea of having a mental health and addictions summit. I totally support that, and even to the point where maybe there needs to be a resolution at some point here where we could make that happen. Mental health is one of the main issues that we're struggling with right in our community, been elevated by the pandemic, and I think it's going to continue too, right? We talk about the residential school of the past, but the new monster, I guess, that has arisen in the last few years is the child welfare system, and many of our children that are not living at home, not living in their communities, and the trauma that they're experiencing because of being snatched away from their families and their community and their culture. So I agree. I appreciate hearing words from Frank too, who's on the police commission, I guess, about our bylaws and maybe our band council resolutions and how they've been not being able to be enforced, and the fact that they're working on that. And I'm very interested in that really moving forward in these days ahead. We had a situation in our own community where we BCR'd a non-native lady, not from our community, out of our reserve, and NAPS weren't even able to remove her from our community. That was very, very disappointing and disheartening. The issue that Chief mentioned about their investigations and so on, and how and it has happened in our community, and there's been individuals that have been charged, but the sad part about all of that again is that the judicial system is, I'm not sure what it is, but I'd venture to say that the Canadian and the provincial system that we live under, I know it obviously doesn't benefit us in any way. Actually, I don't know if it's systemic racism all over again happening to the point where they don't really care about us, and they don't care about what happens in our community. They don't care if we kill each other off. And those are strong words, but that's just how I feel today. Because people get charged, they're on the street the next day selling again. And just making a mockery of our council, of our judicial system there, of our governance in our community, and even overall. And so this afternoon, I think I want to say, just in closing, because I know we're running out of time, in terms of prevention, and I know the Chief of Police mentioned that as long as there's demand, there's going to be supply. And Deputy Grand Chief Betty, appreciate your comments about that you've made at the Mushkego table there about a month and a half ago, and even today, and how you want to move forward, and in terms of prevention, in terms of healing and treatment. One of my observations and experiences, even with my own brother, is that there's a lot of people in our communities that are not able to access the help, the funding that they need to get healing. And I'm going to say this, and I want to say it kindly, and I want to say it in total respect, because I respect everyone, and I think people that know me know I respect everyone, but a lot of the programs, the treatment programs, are many of our members in our communities, because of the different beliefs, some of the beliefs cannot access the help that they really need, because there's criterias there, right? Most of the treatment programs are, I would say, what we normally say, traditionally based. And not everybody adheres to that in our communities. And if we're going to keep moving forward in that direction, then we're going to be missing a lot of our community members. There's a lot of people in our communities, in our First Nations communities, that adhere to other faiths or beliefs and not able to access funding. Back in 1992, me and a group of other Native ladies and men started a group called Rising Above to deal with the issues of sexual abuse and eventually residential school across our country. We were a national group. We were Native governed, Native founded, and continue as a Native organization. When the Healing Fund came, the Residential School Healing Fund came, we were so excited because 3 of our board members, Gary Kikwish, who is from Wiagamau Lake, Selma Poulin from Bearskin Lake, and Howard Jolly from Moose Factory, but Washkaginish band member, were on our board. And they are residential school survivors. So we were excited. We put our proposal together. We handed it into the government or whoever was in charge at that time of the Residential School Healing Fund. And we were denied because we were a Christian organization. And yet we were helping a lot of our people across the country and even into the United States. And so, again, I appeal to you, Deputy Grand Chief, and your department, and to the Muskego Health Department, and maybe to everybody else to really consider, the healing programs that we have, and to make sure that all our members are able to access that. My brother Glenn was one that would not go to a traditional healing treatment program. And because of that, he was not able to access any funding or any help. Any help that we tried to get him, we had to pay that out of our own pockets as his brothers and sisters and my dad and my mom. And so I'm grateful for all the work that NAPS is doing. I'm glad to hear of the negotiations for funding that took place and getting the extra officers that we really need. I know that's very critical. Muskego Council also were granted two officers, drug-related officers, unit officers in our area, but that has stalled again. That regional drug task force that we have didn't get the funding that they need, and so again, on behalf of them and on behalf of my deputy chief who carries this file in our community, we ask for your support, Nishnawbe Aski, to make sure that the Muskego Council Regional Drug Task Force get the money that they need. When the two unit officers from NAPS came to Moose Factory, before I became chief, I was counseling there in Moose Factory. My wife and I are both counselors. We went to the meeting on the drug issue at Moose Creek. There was a couple of hundred people there because it's such a big issue. And we, the two unit officers, drug unit officers from Thunder Bay were there, that were stationed here in Thunder Bay, and they said that Moose Creek was by far in the 9 communities the most busiest in terms of drugs. And so that when I came into office, we started a process, what we call the Community Protection Order, where we worked along with NAPS and NAPS Legal, along with our council and our legal counsel in developing this Community Protection Order, and I think we finally got all the legalities of it down pat, and now it's up to Moose Creek to come up with the processes how we're going to carry this out in eventually removing the drug dealers from our community. So working along with NAPS and our legal, we finally came to a place where this is going to be enforceable from what we understand. And now it's up to Moose Creek to finally bring it to completion, take it to our membership, and get it passed at the membership meeting to deal with, at least in one way, the drug issue. Like the police chief said, there's a lot of issues, right? There's the prevention, social issues, and so on, the legal issues. But I think, too, there needs to be continued movement, not only from Nishnawbe Aski, but the Chief of Ontario office, in how the judicial system operates in our communities. It's totally unacceptable. Like I said earlier, I don't think they really care about who we are. We need to keep pushing that forward to make sure that we're taken care of, and the things that we want enforced in our communities will be enforced. They'll be recognized. And that, so in saying all of that, like I said, I appreciate Deputy Grand Chief, your presentation here and the work that you're doing, and definitely you have our support in moving forward in dealing with this issue. Miigwech.
Thank you, Chief Mervyn. I am going to go to the virtual hand that's up, Chief Bruce, and then we're going to go right into the presentation by Minister Haidu. So, Chief Bruce.
Thank you for letting me speak again. As you may know, that drug addiction affects all our communities, and I just want to say I support the summit that you will have that was called for by Chief Wesley. I just wanted to speak a little bit and I won't take much time, but I think this is important. What's going on in our community with the lack of adequate healthcare, and this is something that's near to my heart because we have lost band members to overdoses, young people, and that hits our families hard in the community. So something I wanted to talk about was having a more wide range of services, health services in the community, and this is something that I wanted to bring forward to as I sit on the Land Chiefs Committee on Health, but wanted to speak specifically on our Suboxone program. With our Suboxone program, we've been having that program going on over 10 years, and it's supposed to be a risk abatement program, meaning that people use that program, but are weeded off that program eventually by lowering the doses of the Suboxone, and it's not working in my view because we have a long-term clients of that program going on close to 10 years now, and I just sometimes feel some great empathy for them, to try to break free of that because it's just a drug. It's just another drug that's is supposed to be used as a tool to get off the addiction. So there's some things lacking there with the program, like case management, and maybe even other referral services. So I'd like to see something like that put on the agenda coming up at the summit. So I'll leave it at that. There's many issues to discuss. So miigwech.
Miigwech, Chief Bruce. I guess this will close this off now, and we're going to go to the next presenter. He's been on the virtual for a while. Okay, so she is ready on the Zoom and can stay till 5:15. Okay. Whatever needs to be done, because I don't know how to do it. Miigwech to the presenters. Miigwech. You're on, Patty. Mr. Patty. I hear you.
You're on, Patty. Mr. Patty. Thanks, everyone. I had to wait till someone unmuted me. I bet there's lots of people in my life that wish they could put me on mute. So I appreciate the invitation to be here today and to be with everyone. I am here today in Ottawa. I wish I could have been there in person, but unfortunately the House is still sitting, and I think we're done voting for today. So I think I will not be interrupted during my time with you, and that's very good. Miigwech again for the invitation. I'm on the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin people, but you all know where I come from, the traditional territory of Fort William First Nation, and of course a signatory to the Robinson Superior Treaty Area. And hello, Grand Chief Derek Fox, and I heard Deputy Grand Chief Anna Betty Ashley Penescum talking just now about substance use and mental health, and Deputy Grand Chief Bobby Narcisse, and of course Deputy Grand Chief Victor Linklater. And I know that there are many other chiefs, including some from the riding I have the pleasure of representing. So I just feel so fortunate to be a member of Parliament for Northern Ontario in Thunder Bay Superior North, but also the Minister of Indigenous Services. And it's a unique combination in a way because I do have such a strong and long history in Northern Ontario, and certainly although I've been working with Nan extensively as a member of Parliament over the number of years that I've been a member of Parliament, so the last almost 7 years, of course, worked closely with Nan in my previous roles as well, as a public health professional, as a planner, with the Dennis Franklin Cromartie High School, as you know, and doing leadership work with young people, and then later on as the executive director of Shelter House. And so I know the important work that all of the leaders do in not just their own communities, but obviously for the members that find themselves in larger urban centers, including Thunder Bay. And I have to say that Nan is so well regarded in Ottawa. You know, it's not often that a regional body like Nan and the members that it represents is so well known. But I will say that everybody here knows about Nan. Everybody knows about the territory and the incredible advocacy that you all do together as members of that organization. So I am, again, thrilled to be here in this new role. I guess I have to stop saying it's new now. It's been almost a full session as being the Minister of Indigenous Services. And just, I am the Minister of FedNor as well. And many of you will have interacted with FedNor for a variety of economic development projects in your own region or maybe in the past. So there are many things on your agenda, and they are all in their own right huge challenges and huge opportunities. I know you've been talking about COVID-19 and the incredible burden of managing COVID-19 in smaller communities and remote communities and communities with less robust healthcare systems. And I have to say, I am so impressed by the leadership that Indigenous communities and leaders have shown through COVID-19 on making sure that people get through this safely. And I know there have been lots of deaths tragically, but also lots and lots of success in keeping COVID-19 out of communities and bringing down surges quickly, getting people vaccinated, helping people get access to treatment and supports if they do get sick. I know you've also been talking about the Human Rights Tribunal orders and compensation agreements, and Nan is a very active partner. You should be incredibly proud of the work that you've all done together to make sure that the Northern and Remote Quotient consideration is part of those conversations. NARC, as it's fondly referred to now, is, I think, going to be a game changer, not just for Nan territories, but of course, for remote communities across the country. And I think that vision of Nan to include remoteness consideration is a legacy that you should all be proud of for those communities across the country that also find themselves in extremely challenging situations as a result of their remoteness. I know you've been talking about the Nan housing strategy, something everywhere I go that First Nations leaders are talking to me about, the importance of investment in faster investment and less onerous requirements for communities so that houses can get built and they can get built in the ways that communities feel is appropriate for their needs and their own particular circumstances. I know that there's been a ton of work on education, and I want to congratulate you all. I know that there's education tables happening, and the focus on education, I think, is a legacy that you'll all be so proud to leave as you eventually we all turn over the mantle, if you will, of leadership to the next generation. And that's something that I think serves us all well, to focus on education. I just heard testimony from a chief speaking about the loss of his brother to opioid overdose and the ongoing opioid crisis. I will say this is obviously not unique to First Nations and Indigenous people, but of course, again, any health determinant, any health outcome is worsened for Indigenous communities. And of course, the intersection of colonization and ongoing intergenerational trauma, compounded with the crisis that we see from coast to coast to coast, makes it that much harder for communities to have the kinds of things they need to support people. And I will just say on that issue, it's an issue I've been working on my entire life, substance use and mental health. And I profoundly hurt for any family. And I think most of us can think of someone that we love that is struggling with mental health or substance use. And so I want you to know this as a personal as well as a professional passion for me to do better in this space. And I'm looking forward to the solutions that Nan is proposing. I know you've also been talking about policing and the need for self-determined policing, reclamation and healing, and many, many other things. And so the list is really an indication of just the huge and vast number of issues that you're juggling at any time, and the amount of work that you're all undertaking. And of course, I want to say a specific acknowledgement and a word of support for the communities that are experiencing such significant flooding. Of course, floodings and forest fires and COVID and the many other kinds of crises that that happen as that we've seen communities have to manage really add to the burden of leadership, and it adds to the burden for community members as we're all struggling to get through some of these kinds of things together. For Indigenous communities that are remote and rural, it can be an extra layer of complexity when you're dealing with a crisis like that. I want you to know that Indigenous Services Canada and the officials, the emergency management officials, are ready to help and provide supports wherever necessary. And so if you are not feeling supported in any of those crisis situations, whether it's flooding or the upcoming fire season, or you're feeling that there needs to be more, or you have a new idea or different idea, please, if you're not getting response from the department, please let my political team know so that we can find out what the delay in response is. And I do want you to know that there is still funding available through the Indigenous Community Support Fund should you need prevention or outbreak response supports in your community. And on that note, on COVID, and hopefully that'll be the last time I have to say that word, but I want to just encourage people to continue to promote the third booster dose as we head into fall. The epidemiologists do see, hopefully, a lessening of cases in the next months to come, but are quite worried about a fall surge. And we know that booster doses can protect people from hospitalization and from death. And so if you need any help whatsoever in terms of uptake and getting people vaccinated with that third dose, please don't hesitate to reach out. In terms of areas that we are making progress on, I did speak a little bit about the compensation and long-term care, long-term reform agreements for child and family services. And I do think we are making progress. These are, as you know, challenging conversations, in particular the long-term reform agreements, as it is complex and it is vast. But I am so thrilled, again, to have Nan at that table with your own particular perspective. And I think that obviously the government of Canada is very committed to finalizing those agreements and working with all parties to be able to do that, hopefully in the very near future. As part of the Budget Implementation Act that's in front of Parliament right now, MPs are debating this Implementation Act, and they are hopefully going to pass the budget, is the repeal of the Safe Drinking Water for First Nations Act. Many of you spoke about this and the lack of utility of this particular piece of legislation and the very colonial approach that this legislation placed on First Nations. So when the Budget Act passes, and we have every anticipation that it will also repeal that act. And I hope that we will be able to work closely as we update or develop replacement legislation on safe drinking water that's going to better meet the needs and desires of First Nations communities. And so we'll be looking to Nan particularly because, of course, you have about 20 or so continuing long-term drinking water advisories. And I think you will have a very unique perspective and a very specific perspective on what needs to be in any renewed co-developed water legislation. And so, again, we'll be reaching out if we haven't already to talk to you about what needs to be in that legislation. On the long-term drinking water advisories, communities, I am with my team working out a schedule of ongoing and regular check-ins with First Nations leaders that are in communities with a long-term drinking water advisory. It really is my hope, and certainly the government's hope, that we can end these long-term drinking water advisories together. I know that each community is different. Each community has a different set of complexities and needs, and each community has a different reality. But I think together we can, discover what those barriers are and remove them one by one so that we can get clean drinking water for everyone. And I know in many cases, it is operations, it is human resources, it is training, it is sufficient funding for equitable salaries, and it is other underlying infrastructure. So I'm looking forward to being able to work with you on what your specific needs are as a community that potentially does have a long-term drinking water advisory, so that we reach that goal that I know you share of making sure that community members, no matter where they live, have access to clean drinking water. On education, I also want to affirm and reconfirm our support to the terms of reference tables and the discussions ahead. Our officials and my team are going to continue to work with you on this and help move this forward. Again, I think that self-determined education is critical to the fundamental work of decolonization and the fundamental work of reconciliation, and of course, self-determination. So I will look forward to hearing directly from you through either directly to me or to my officials in my political team if there are continued concerns about that work. But my direction to Deputy Fox and her team is to look for consensus and to get those terms of reference completed so that we can move forward quickly on the next piece of work. The budget most recently announced includes $2.3 billion for housing on reserve. Now, I know that this is not going to be enough to close the current gap in housing. I also know it's not enough to deal with the current shovel-ready gap in housing, but I do think it's a significant amount of money to get started with. And my objective now is to be able to support you to spend the housing money as quickly as possible so that we can build houses. My focus is to make sure that as we spend that money, we are able to highlight to the federal government just how quickly we can get that money out the door and demonstrate the ongoing need so that in future budget rounds or budget seasons that I can go back and show the incredible hard work of communities across the country in using that money and getting it out. Now, I know this will be challenging because there are supply challenges, there are labor challenges, and there are all kinds of other challenges in regards to supporting infrastructure. But I want you to identify those for me as early as possible so that we can support you to work through those issues and figure out a way forward. And I think that we can do quite a bit of work together with the amount that we received in budget 2022. And as I said, prepare ourselves for future rounds of budget planning so that we can be well positioned to demonstrate that we can indeed use more and continue to close that gap. And then I wanted to just quickly touch on the work Minister Mendicino, Minister of Public Safety, is doing. He has begun consultations on Indigenous policing legislation. He is the lead on this particular file, but it is something that many communities have spoken about, the need for better public safety, better policing, better prevention programs, and certainly self-determined legislation. And so please keep my office in the loop if there is anything you want to flag for me. Minister Mendicino and I work closely together, so I know that he will be open to any comments about the process or the potential proposed legislation that comes in a little while. And then Minister Miller, as you know, is the lead on our government's work, in particular on the file for missing and murdered Indigenous women, as well as efforts around communities that are undertaking the discovery of unmarked burial sites and residential school commemoration. And I will be working really closely with him on both of those files, but also on many other files that will touch on communities that are in the NAN territory. there is so much that I know is going on, and so many challenges that we're facing, from climate change to the pandemic to opioid crises and on and on. But I do think that we have a moment here of opportunity to really focus in on making life better for the constituents that you serve and for communities across the NAN territory. And I am really looking forward to the work that we have ahead of us over the next little while. So thank you for being flexible with me about my time with you. And I look forward to being in person with you in the very near future. Miigwech.
Thank you, Minister, for your presentation. I was really trying to slow you down, but you were like,
For your presentation. I was really trying
but
to slow you down. But you were like,
translators have to keep up. Well, I think
I got a note about how
we're all good now? You're good now? Okay. Yeah, I just want to say shout out to the translators because they had to keep up. And I was trying to slow her down, but it didn't work. So I think she's still available if there was any questions for her. And for the last presentation, we do have to proceed, so we're going to ask your patience to keep you another 45 minutes, up to 6 o'clock. We do still have one more presentation. So Minister is still available if there's any questions, but basically that was an update on the work that they're doing, the continuing work to support the work of NAN. Okay, Mia. So I'm going to go ahead and start. Okay. Didn't see you, Dean. Sorry about that.
Just a question for the minister.
Okay, is the minister still
Is he
on?
on?
She's on.
Okay, Minister, I'm from Wanaman Lake, Dean Cromartie, Deputy Chief. I wanted to bring to your attention regarding the Safe Drinking Water Court decision and the compensation. In our community, we had boil water advisory from 2001 to 2005, a 5-year period. And we were informed by the legal counsel that due to the statutory limitations, only people that were born on November 1995 and lived on the reserve during the boil water advisory are eligible. We looked at the department's ban registration list for 2005, and we had a population of 593 people. And based on that court decision, only 84 people are eligible for compensation, which leaves the rest of us out that were on reserve during the boil water advisory period. Our First Nation Wanaman is asking that the government do something to correct that inequality, to make sure all our people that live on the reserve 2001 to 2005 will be compensated. And we prefer a political decision rather than going back to the legal system. Regrets.
Back to Minister Haidu for a response.
Thank you very much, Chief Cromartie. And, you know, I will say this, the drinking water settlement was agreed to by all parties during the negotiations, and I will take your particular concern back to the department. It would not be addressable through this particular agreement because, as I said, the parties all negotiated this agreement and did sign off. For any other people, though, the place that you can go to check if you are eligible for compensation is firstnationsdrinkingwater.ca, and that is a place where claims can be filed as well. It is a third-party administrator that's administering those claims. But I will take back your concern, Chief Marty, and I will see if that we can. I think I just. Oh no, I'm good. I will take back your concern, Chief Marty, and I will see if we can reach out to discuss the details of your situation a little bit more personally.
So the floor is open for any other questions.
Thank you.
It's proxy Dean Cromarty, for the record. Okay, I don't see none. Okay. Go ahead.
Okay, hello, bonjour. My name is Gary Kuzis from Nishnawbe, and I got a question to the minister here regarding our infrastructure, the water plant. You're talking about closing a gap by 2030, and how are you going to meet the words you're saying with all these BWAs right across Canada, and especially remote? Our boil water advisories, it's going to reach 10,000 days by June 19. And is that going to be another drag for this closing the gap for the community's infrastructure? Like, I know the class action is on, but the community is not jumping for joy for it, because it's not meeting the requirements that's needed for our community, and the limitation process for applying your claims, it's very limited. You know, and I think there has to be a lot of homework to be done yet regarding this closing the gap. So I don't know how you guys are going to change within 7 years, I guess, to meet all the requirements what the First Nations need. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Back to Minister Haidu.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Back to Minister Haidu.
Well, thank you very much, Chief. And as one of the litigants, you obviously know a lot about the ins and outs of that negotiation, more than I would. And I also know that despite the fact that there has been a significant investment in the Nishnawbe's plant, that you're still working through some of the issues around operations, and we'll be there to support you to do that. And anything, like I said, anything that is outstanding, I want to know about, because my priority as a minister is to make sure that the remaining 33, and we started with 150 plus boil water advisories, by the way, in 2015, that the remaining 33 across the country, that money is not the deterrent, and that even technical expertise or other kinds of underlying barriers that I can't see are not the deterrent. In some communities, it is operations, and it is having enough qualified people in community that can do that work. there are different models that are happening around the country that are starting to look at kind of a group model of providing support for water operators. So in budget 2022, the Atlantic Water Authority was funded. It's an Indigenous water authority that provides some volume of capacity for a number of smaller communities that struggle with much of the same kinds of struggles that some other communities struggle with. For example, the maintenance, some of the challenges around water operation, some of the challenges about ongoing training, and some of the relief work for communities when water operators are not able to continue their work for whatever reason. So we continue to work with 32 boil water advisory communities so that I can fully understand what needs to happen to remove those remaining barriers. And let me tell you, this commitment is sincere. It will require you to be completely upfront with me about what it is that I can do as the minister, or what I need to push the government to do to eliminate those boil water advisories. I will just say this as part of that class action, there's about $6 billion to provide the financial support for communities around the infrastructure needs that will need to be continued to be funded for the remaining boil water advisories. There's also about $250 million in budget 2022 around operations, maintenance, and other kinds of infrastructure challenges. And I will not hesitate to go back to the Minister of Finance if that is not enough, or if there are other barriers that we just can't see at this time. But this is a sincere commitment. I'm reluctant to put a date on the commitment because I do know that it is, at the end of the day, Chief's decisions to lift the water advisory when they feel that the water is of a suitable quality for communities to drink. But nonetheless, you can continue to count on me to be an advocate to make sure that the money, the support, and whatever other kinds of barriers are in the way have solutions. So let's continue to have conversations, and I do look forward to working with communities, the 20 or so in NAN that are on a water advisory on a much deeper one-on-one level.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Minister, for your response. And he's na end. I think that's, no, I don't see any other hands up. So we are going to get right into the last presentation. And it is on the Emergency Response Management Trilateral Table, led by Grant Chief Derek Fox, Infrastructure Director Mike McKay, and Indigenous Services Canada, and Scott, and if you can all come up.
Thank you for your patience there, Chiefs. We got this final report. We know that it's got to be done this evening or today because one of our presenters will not be here tomorrow. So I'm just going to get straight to it and call up Mike McKay.
Thank you, Grand Chief. So there's the dates. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Chiefs, youth, elders, Women's Council. My name is Michael McKay, Infrastructure and Housing Director at NAN. So I'll be presenting the emergency management update. Let me grab this. Is this the clicker? Yeah, so so the mandate we wanted to present was the Resolution 1930, NAN Fire and Emergency Management Service. In 2019, NAN Chiefs and Assembly directed the Executive Council to begin the development of a fire and emergency management service. Due to all the challenges and tragic events we've had within the NAN territory with fire safety, One of the initiatives we've been working on for the last 5-6 years was the Amber's Fire Safety Campaign. And one of the challenges there was that trying to deliver that service and programming without that fire service at the community level. And communities do have that challenge there. So that's one of the priorities that the NAN executive have made, that we work on that. So we did negotiate with Indigenous Services Canada for 2 capacity positions, an emergency management manager and an EM officer. And this was to provide emergency management advocacy, support, training to communities. So once these positions were established back in early 2020, that's when the pandemic was announced, and a majority of all our focus was to assist and support communities during their COVID response. And so in our work, I've just listed a few of the things that we worked on with the emergency management staff. One of the first things was updating the NAN corporate continuity and pandemic plan. The staff joined the NAN COVID-19 task team, assisting with a number of documents to help with communities in their response to the pandemic. Yeah, they also joined the NAN COVID-19 task team, which was established by the NAN executive at the time, along with the health transformation team. Other initiatives that they were involved with was the Operation Remote Immunity. I think there's about 1, 2, and 3, which happened last year during the winter months. Just move to the next slide. So this kind of brings me to the EM trilateral table. This stemmed from a report that was completed at NAN. It began a review in early 2020, which the review focused on aspects of emergency management and highlighting gaps and deficiencies within the system. And in May of 2021, that final report, Emergency Management for First Nations in Ontario, was finalized, and it was submitted to both the federal and provincial government. As a result, this review had 20 recommendations were brought forward, including the establishment of a NAN-EM trilateral table. I just wanted to mention one of the recommendations in there was to look at establishing a fire and emergency management service, developing a service delivery model that would focus on fire and emergency management. So recently, we had some discussions with the federal government to discuss the possibility of establishing the NAN emergency trilateral table, which would focus on the recommendations from the review. And so those discussions were happening. And this would, like I said earlier, to address gaps and deficiencies in emergency management, in the emergency management system and the service, look at funding, look at the related mechanisms and policies. And we just want to make sure while we're bringing this forward today is to notify leadership about this and ensure that we have proper consultation, engagements with communities before we move forward on this trilateral table. Yeah, so this table would allow for open communication and accountability between NAN and both levels of government when it comes to First Nation emergency management. Establishment of this emergency management system specific to First Nation communities and culture is necessary to successful emergency management for First Nations moving forward. I think that would be the overall goal of the emergency management table. Is you could almost think of it as a emergency management reform initiative. Some of the objectives of that trilateral table would be conducting assessments in regards to infrastructure, capacity, level of operation maintenance funding. I know the minister just mentioned that as well, and that's an update we'll be providing tomorrow as those levels have increased with the operation and maintenance policy reform that's going on right now. Also to, like I said earlier, one of the main goals of that is to look at what a fire and emergency management service would look like. So just moving on to this slide here, we want, especially with the flood and fire season happening right now, obviously with the floods happening now, and we did have a busy fire season last year with a number of evacuations for communities. This is something that was brought forward to NAN, I think back in late March, was that the federal government through Indigenous Services Canada has developed a new joint command structure model for First Nations emergency management in Ontario. And the purpose of why we wanted to bring it forward today was sometimes, especially in the event of emergency, there's no clear way or pathway to declaring a state of emergency. We've been, the leadership here knows of those challenges. Even for myself, when my home community of Bearskin Lake declared a state of emergency due to a flood of the Severn River, cut off a number of critical roads, one of them to the airport. They had called me on a Saturday night to help them. Luckily, we did have some documents on the steps of declaring a state of emergency, and so with this new joint command structure, we just wanted to bring this forward. So to ensure the communities and the leadership here today were aware of this. And we've seen this, we've had a few discussions with ISK on this, but as I mentioned in the slide here, we weren't involved in the creation of this model. We haven't provided any input on it yet. And so moving forward, why we brought it forward here was to discuss this new structure, and if the communities or leadership here today wants to provide some feedback to us, we can kind of put that together. Any responses or information, we could prepare that and submit it to them. If it's through the chiefs, communities, other partners, we could communicate that information to them. But we did ask Indigenous Services Canada to come here today to present the new joint command structure. Am I good? Yeah. So questions or anything after?
Maybe questions after the presentation. Yeah, so we're going to have Ann Scotton give a presentation on the new emergency response, and then after that, we'll look at opening the floor to questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Grand Chiefs. Thank you, Deputy Grand Chiefs. Thank you to the chiefs that have stayed to listen to this presentation, and I'm sorry that it's the last of the day and so long a day, because I would have liked to spend a lot more time, but I will try to make it very short in order to give people some time to ask questions if they have them. So perhaps I'll just start by saying Indigenous Services Canada and Ontario Region are indeed as concerned and as fixed on the need for further support, more community-based response to needs, and less policy discussion, and less forward thinking, and less engagement, and less consultation. And it's time, and we believe that it's long past time to pass to action. So the one thing that I will say, a concrete action that we have been able to take in the last year, both in response to the province's study of deaths on reserve, fire deaths on reserve, and in response to NAN's report and the work that we've done and the policy and program discussions that we've had, is that over the last year we were able to identify $20 million for the replacement of fire trucks, real equipment, real fire trucks, 54 fire trucks in 40 communities, 46 communities, I think. And that replaces every single one of the fire trucks that were over 30 years old in communities in Ontario, every single one of the fire trucks that are over 20 years old in Ontario, and every single one of the trucks that we did not know had fallen into disrepair or were not, or were beyond repair. Every single one of the trucks that we had identified, and identified through communities, directly to chiefs, and we did it in 6 weeks. And those approvals went out January the 14th or whatever it was, and the funding has flowed by the end of March. That's phenomenal. So that is the concrete action that we've tried to put in place. And it doesn't mean that we won't go on talking, and it doesn't mean that it's met every need, because it hasn't met every need. It hasn't met the need for other equipment. It hasn't met the need for training. It hasn't met the need for fire halls. It hasn't met many needs. But I'm trying to say, I guess, is that that's the concrete need that we identified. We went after the money, we got the money, and we got it out to you. So I know that it's part of a much, much bigger picture, but what we are trying to do in our First Nations emergency focus on emergency management and the management of events and the response to events is that we are trying to put Indigenous partners, First Nations, first. And we're trying to make them one of 3 full and equal partners in responding to emergency events. So the First Nation or the Indigenous organization is the first partner. That's what you see in yellow, and I'll talk about it in just a moment. The second is Canada, Indigenous Services Canada and Public Safety, because often there are rangers involved, there's Canadian Armed Forces, there's flights, or there's other assistance that the Army can give. And the third is Ontario, the Provincial Emergency Operations Centre, and NMRF primarily, and Indigenous Affairs Ontario. And what we're trying to do is say to a First Nation, and I'm going to just read from my notes so I don't miss anything, and this approach Of course, Mike is correct. It was not developed in conjunction with NAN per se, or with Chiefs of Ontario, or with IAO, or with AIAI, or with Independent First Nations. It was developed with the First Nations that we are aware and that have approached us about doing things better, focusing on their needs and on leadership in their First Nations at the time of an emergency. Not a kind of, not an imaginary emergency, a real emergency, like the ones that we have been facing for the last 7 days with the communities of Saskatchewan and Fort Albany and Attawapiskat, but primarily those two communities who were evacuated and who told us on day one they wanted their vulnerable population evacuated as a precautionary measure. And on day 3, they said they want their full community evacuated. And we took a decision. We had our joint command call with our colleagues at PEOC and our colleagues from other federal departments. And we sat. It took 40 minutes for the first joint command call to take the decision and to give approval for what the chiefs wanted done. And it was organized in the context of Mushkegowuk Tribal Council and their emergency management coordinator that those two chiefs had chosen as their Indigenous lead. And we respect those choices. And we will go on respecting what Indigenous communities and leaders want this department to do. And we will continue to convince and try to strategize in ways that will get the resources into those communities when they're needed, plan for them, and execute those plans when an emergency happens. So that's what the First Nation emergency event means. It means something's happening, a flood's coming. So we knew this in about January because we know every year there are floods. I mean, it's not sort of scientific. It's what happens every year. There's floods. And we have been evacuating with Saskatchewan for 20 odd years. We're fortunate that for the last 6 years, and now the 7th, Saskatchewan has not flooded. But in 2014, an incredible, phenomenal flood happened, and it wiped out the entire community. And many of those community members were evacuated for up to 2 years, and the community was rebuilt. And many of those community members did not return till 2017. So we're very much aware that precaution and risk assessment needs to be taken into account, and we need to do what the traditional knowledge tells us, and what people who've had experience of the flood season and floods in their community, and what happens when there are ice jams, and what happens when there's flooding over land, and what happens when a community is wiped out. We have to respond to those demands, to those needs, and we have to provide those resources. And we don't have time to talk about it for a long, long time. We have to take those decisions, and we have to be ready to do the things that they want done. So that's what the joint command approach is. No wrong door. You can come in through PEOC, you can come in through a tribal council, as the two communities that I'm talking about did. They came in through Mushkegowuk. We worked immediately. Fort Albany was one of the first that had worked with Mushkegowuk and was working on this concept with us. So we knew that that's where the first, that's what we thought, where the first floods would happen and where we could first try this concept out. The Joint Command call is risk assessment. What's the risk of the flood? Is the water rising? And we took our cue. In fact, at every call, the first report was about risk assessment from the elders, from the flood manager, from the flood director, and from the emergency management coordinators in the First Nations, not from MNRF. MNRF had not started their air surveillance. On April 25th, they had not started their air surveillance of a flood season that they expected to break. They expected breakup. That was what they said on their site on April 25th. We started working with the community on February 24th. We had our first tabletop exercise to practice what we do when we knew breakup was happening. Then the weather warmed up, then breakup was moved, then weather cooled, then there was another snow. But that's what people need to watch. I mean, it's not because We have a website from MNRF that says the weather for the next week is going to be this. It's that every day, the river keeper, the people who are the elders who've watched this happen every year for decades tell us what's happening. The color of the water, where the ice jams are, the fact that the water's going over the ice, I don't know. And neither do many of the people that are involved in the emergency management response. But the people in the communities that we work with know, and that's who we listen to. So then we have our decision making. And when a chief says to us, we want precautionary evacuation, we say, how many people, chief? And who do you want to start with? And when do you want to start? Is it today? Is it tomorrow at 8 o'clock? What do you want to do? And then we work with our partners from PIOC. We set up the planes, and in they come. And on this occasion, we had all kinds of difficulties because PIOC told us that they didn't have enough planes, and then they told us we'd have to use 16-seaters and 9-seaters. Well, for a population of 1,800 people for a full evacuation, that's not good enough, not when the water is coming up over the causeway, not when the airport's about to be flooded. So a lot of these things we need to work through with communities. And eventually, when Chief Wesley and I were talking 3 days ago, I said, why didn't they use 50-seaters, 50-seat planes? Oh, Chief Wesley said, I told them to. I said, I could phone a charter and get a 50-seater, and that's what we'll do next time. If that's what's required, that's what we'll do. We won't wait. We will work with the community to do what the community wants to get people out safely. And that's what this is about. It's about working to have the Indigenous partner, the chief, the First Nation, the tribal council, whoever is the Indigenous partner, telling us what they need, acting on it, and approving it. The next piece is kind of the traditional PIOC, all partner calls, where yesterday they invited 227 people. So I think there were 110 or 140 on some of these calls. And many of you have been on these calls. I mean, I'm looking at Frank. Frank's been on many, many of these calls. These calls are not decision-making. They're not decisive. They're exchanges of information at a minute level. And frankly, in my opinion, it's a waste of the chief's time. And that's who we want to be working with. We want to be serving. We want to be getting things done. And we want the people who need to be getting those things done funded. And it's not all about funding, but much of it is about funding to ensure that if the province is not doing what's needed, or we can't do what's needed because we're not a service provider, that the funding is in the hands of the communities and in the hands of the service providers that can get it done. So I don't want to speak for long. I said that. Now I've spoken for longer than I wanted to speak, but I do want to give some time if people have comments or if they want to ask questions.
So now I'm going to open the floor for questions. Nishnawbe Aski.
Can you hear me? Thank you for your presentation. I think that, as you could see, Ms. Nishnawbe Cree, ISN Moscow was up there, and it's really something that we've sort of taken over the last little while on emergency management. And I think that the First Nations taking up the responsibility to do some of this stuff is fundamentally important. I think that we're dealing with communities at their worst. They're having to leave their reserve, and sharing a tribal council with a lot of communities that have had to do that over so many years, it inspired us to say, okay, well, what about First Nations hosting First Nations? And I think that's really been something that the government has supported us in trying to do, is inspiring other communities also to take over evacuees when this happens. But we've also partnered with people who we believe truly have the experience and the background in order to help. It's First Nation staffed. with great experience, and I think that what we're trying to do is make sure that that this is done properly, but it's also done by First Nations and it's culturally relevant. So back to what you were saying, I think that each First Nation has its own self-determinance and autonomy and independence to be able to make the decisions on what we need to do. I think there's some real challenges sometimes to the municipalities. I've said on several calls, no First Nation a member wants to be somewhere where they're not welcome. So we'd love to have as many evacuees as we can hold in our community, and hopefully we can inspire other communities to do that. I think that we're really trying to push that there's process that has to be followed, and that we know that process and we're aware of the process in order for that to happen. And it's about building capacity within our First Nations too. We have to make sure that we're prepared for any of these evacuees, and that we can uplift our communities to be able to host communities that we can share experiences and traditions and ceremonies too. It's not perfect. I think we can do better in regards to being able to support our communities to be able to do this stuff. I think that we have to make sure they're properly funded to be able to sort of take on evacuees from other communities. We're doing the best we can to be able to follow through with this and make sure that everybody is safe in these circumstances, and we're looking forward to continuing the partnership that we've created with ISC to make sure this happens, and we thank you for your support in moving this forward. Miigwech.
Maybe I could just say that one of the really important aspects, and you touched on it, is the receiving and the working with people who are evacuated, and some of the security aspects, which we hear about policing, we hear about enforcement, we hear about issues of addiction or people with mental health issues who are evacuated and who are exacerbated. Their situation is difficult to begin with, and in a crisis situation, it's frightening, and it's really jarring and traumatizing. And so one of the things that we've recognized, and I thank you for your support. I know that you were at one of the graduating ceremonies that I was able to attend, and I've attended a couple of them now, one of them in Thunder Bay, of 50 female graduates of a security course, and a course which is going to prepare them and allow them to be employed and work out of their own communities. 50 women from 30 different communities. But over the course of the last 8 months, we've been able to support the training of about 160 individuals, every one of them Indigenous, from over 40 communities. And there are two levels. One is security itself, or what I call community security and wellness. And the other is the incident command training, which allows them to take over and allows them to work in the office or in the command center. These are all very military terms, which I'm sort of learning. But in unified command for the response to a crisis, that is where people who are familiar with the community need to be. You can't have somebody who comes in from somewhere else and bosses everybody around. And I'm sorry to say that's sometimes the way some of these emergency situations sound. And people are ordering people off planes, people are ordering people onto planes, and it's a frightening set of circumstances. It's a situation that nobody wants to have to face. But chiefs and council chiefs and community members, the leadership, need to get people out for their own safety. If the water's rising and you have hundreds and hundreds of people to move, sometimes you have to start with the most vulnerable, because it could take longer to get them out in the event of a real, a real flood, as we had in Saskatchewan in 2014. So we've learned a lot, and we've learned a lot about the orderly and sensitive and appropriately, sensitive is the only word I can think of, empathetic. You know, if somebody is older, can't move quickly, somebody's pregnant, afraid to be giving birth somewhere other than in their community, these are terrible, terrible human questions. Do you try to convince somebody to move to a place where they don't know anybody, they're away from their family? So all of these questions about trying to keep families together, trying to keep people who are traumatized, are terribly upset, these are huge questions. And so a lot of the work that you've supported and other communities, Sheshagowaning, Little Current, we had 2 graduating classes here in Thunder Bay. We're about to have another one in Pekanjikam. These are massively important developments in the ability of communities to maintain the capacity that they need with people who are either in their own community or are in sister communities or are neighbors and friends and cousins and aunties in neighboring communities. And they know each other. And so they're not going to an unfamiliar place with unfamiliar faces. And that's where I think we need to be making the investment, in making sure that it's First Nations, working with First Nations, serving and helping. Chief Nakaji was going to speak. I don't know.
So there was a couple of hands up. One was virtually. I don't know if she got cut off. Chief Ramona was on there, Sutherland. I don't see her on there now. So the floor is still open to ask questions on the president. Oh, okay.
I just wanted to share some of the experience that Qantas Lakes had recently. And first of all, I want to thank the response that we got from ISK and the province. Had it not been for their guidance, I think things would have been different somehow. So I just want to say thank you very much for coming to our aid when we needed it, when we had the blastomycosis outbreak, which we are still dealing with today. And for our safety, we have not found the source of blastomycosis in our community. So we are, the community's taken upon ourselves to make some remediations, such as remove many wood piles of logs that are, were suspect of breeding ground for blastomycosis. It turned out to be negative after months of investigation. So out of that, and at the outset of this meeting, I had requested a support letter for an inquest for at the former Chief Arthur Moore's request. He lost his son to blastomycosis, and then we had subsequent deaths after that, all resulting from blastomycosis. So in total, we lost 5 people. So now we're here. Spring is coming. Thankfully, the ground is still frozen, but I just wanted to make it a public request that ISK and whoever else needs to help we need that burst of energy to happen, to make these efforts to help the community live with blastomycosis. At this time, we don't know where it is. We investigated many places in the community. We still don't know. But as spring is warming up, our children will want to come out and play. There's many shortcuts. So we need help with those so that we can help our children. We've applied for playgrounds so our children can play in safe areas, so they're not playing out in the bush like we did when we were children. It's sad, but we have to adapt and try to contain the children in the safe area. So my comment is basically, thank you very much for all the help that you've provided us so far. I am requesting sincerely, with all my heart, I need that burst of energy to happen in Qantas Lake so that my community can not suffer again. And good things need to happen out of this. And I'm hoping the inquest will alert all the hospitals near and like everywhere of blastomycosis. You know, we're told by Dr. Catton that it's here and there and everywhere. It's not just not that. But in my community, we suffered 5 deaths, and there are many people who continue to take treatment to get rid of that fungus in their body. So it's please, I just want to urge everyone, if you have any symptoms that, you know, with coughing, and a lot of symptoms sound very similar to COVID, please get checked out for blastomycosis. The symptoms are too similar. Early detection means early treatment. So I just want to say miigwech for this meeting, and thank you, Anne Scotton, for your presentation. And again, I urge that energy to be focused on Constance Lake so that we don't have continued trauma, continued anxiety, so that we too can enjoy the spring and all its wonderfulness. Miigwech.
Chief, I want to thank you for your constant collaboration and for your personal commitment. I know that you've been working on this for a long, long time, from long before you were elected chief, and I know that your election as chief, you never expected to have to face this. So I want to salute you, and I want to say that we have supported, I think you know, the installation of 2 play areas, 2, I forget what they're called, water something or others, and the children who are using those will be protected. It's sad, you're right, it's very, very sad that we can't just go and play in the dirt anymore, as I think every child would, well, anyway, I did as a child, enjoy. And I think that we will work with you. You can assure, you can be assured, and you can assure your community the blast of energy will not be blastomycosis. So thank you so much for your acknowledgement.
The floor recognizes Chief Nakaji online.
Good afternoon, everyone, or good evening. I know everybody's hungry, so I'll make this short. First of all, yes, I can announce today is that we are now in progress of returning our community members, our evacuees home. We're going to be starting off with Hearst and make our way to and then make arrangements along with the team is bring them home from Mississauga. Yeah, it's been a crazy week, 2 weeks we started, but before that we had a discussion, start planning how we're going to move forward. But when it actually happened, it came fast. We declared our emergency on it was 140 miles away when we declared emergency, but it came fast. Within 48 hours, it was basically at Fishing Creek. That's about 30 kilometers away from here, 30 miles. So that threw a curveball to everyone here involved. But what I can say, what was great is this joint command. I think it didn't waste any time. Approval for approvals when quickly.
We patrol no staranoma kay
How, because I hear a translation in the background, but I'll stop for a second. So I know with the joint command, things happen quickly. Yes, I've been involved with PIOC calls in the past where, yeah, there's 150 people on the call, but at the questions that you ask, you don't really get answers at the end or approvals. So this approach we did this year, and I want to give a lot of acknowledgement to everyone involved, but also Wilbert Wesley played a big part in this meetings, and also person standing in front of you all, Anne Scotton, our DG. So I really appreciate the work that she did for us, and the team that moved things quickly without having to speak to 100 different people. It's just, this is what we want, this is what we need. And within I know it takes time to prepare, and that's the message we pass you. It takes 24 hours, of course. Hosting community members need to know that we're coming. They need to prepare. So 24 to 48 hours, we got our first community members out. And again, couple of days later, we had the other community members out of the community. So which was now that our water is rescinding, probably later by tonight, we'll be able to cross our causeway. So again, I just want to say, any emergency, any First Nation that's listening, Chief, I ask you to visit this template, this what's been presented today, because it works. Yeah, I know PIOC call, you have, like I said, 150 people that can provide you a lot of updates. But when you have the decision makers around the table and the experience, I'm still experiencing it, because like I said, we're still returning our community members home. But I suggest you visit this, ask more questions, so you're ready, because we know summer's coming and weather is unpredictable. And I've noticing last year there was a lot of forest fires. So get ready, call for meetings, and get prepared. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chief.
Chief, again, I want to thank you. You and I have been in constant contact, literally every day, and sometimes 7 or 8 times a day. It's been a pleasure and an honor to work with you, and I just feel that your leadership in this, and the leadership of Wilbert Wesley and others, but your community and your team have made all the difference, and we've made it through, and I bless everybody involved, and I hope that we continue to be as lucky.
Floor is still open for comments.
I got a question to Ann here. On this emergency management plan that's put in place, is that for just natural disasters or for the infrastructure failures too? Like, as you know, Nishnawbe was evacuated due to the infrastructure. Then on the first evacuation, we had a difficult time for support. You know, where was that support that you introduced? You know, like, was it just incorporated this year, or, you know, and our community members had struggled for the infrastructure failure? Because today we still suffer on that, you know, like for those 2 evacuations. And it's much understandable for natural disasters, you know, where you have to pretty much act. And I think the infrastructure failure should be the same. So I don't know if there's any changes. And for us, for fire protection is very limited. We don't have no fire truck. We don't have like the previous years. Our structure, we didn't have no fire protection because lack of pressure in our water treatment plant. You know, I think on this emergency management plant, everything has to be incorporated. You know, like everything because everything is a crisis. Everything is an emergency. So I don't know if you have any something new to share. Thank you.
Well, in fact, your point is very well taken. Everything is connected to everything else. If you don't have enough water pressure, you can't fight fires. And if you don't have a water treatment plant that produces enough pressure, you have a crisis. And I think that we've seen that in a number of communities, and a number of tragic house fires and loss of life in communities, and a lot of loss of buildings and structures. And everybody in this room certainly knows that no community can afford to lose housing or accommodation for their members. So yes, everything is connected. And I'll just use and yes, it's new, and yes, it's meant to be a kind of come in, get it done, get the approvals, get the decisions taken. And I think you heard from Chief Nakaji that that's the way we did it. And we did it, and it's over, thank God, or almost over, except for repatriation. But we also had a critical infrastructure failure yesterday. And the chief at Martin Falls contacted me at 8 o'clock last night, and we had a joint command meeting at 8 o'clock this morning. And their intake, the structure which is taking water into their plant was destroyed by an ice jam, was just literally pushed off its moorings, and all the wiring and so on stretched out of. We're trying to see if there's any of it that can be rehabilitated, but we don't think there is. And so currently, the decisions that were taken were to fly bottled water in immediately, so that was authorized this morning at 8 o'clock. And authorization's been given from Ottawa to go in and look at the, if there's anything that can be salvaged from the structure, and if not, how fast a temporary fix can be made to get a truck and to get a pump in. And that pump can also be used, we hope anyway, after, if there's a more permanent fix for fire response and fire service in the community. So yes, it does work for more than, but I think that I have to say that the original idea was natural disasters, floods and fires are the primary purpose, or are the primary focus, if you will, of trying to get at these things, get on them, get the decisions, find out what chiefs need, and get on with it. And so that was the primary motive or the primary objective of setting up this joint command system.
Okay, thank you.
And I guess I should say, and to put Indigenous leadership first, because I think for too long, the way that we've worked is that PEOC and Canada have discussions. We have discussions often with Indigenous peoples as the audience, and it's not appropriate. Indigenous people need to be leading the response in their own communities, and they need to be telling us what they need, not us telling you what we think we can do. And that's literally the reason that we set this up, and it's literally the reason that we will be insisting at every joint command call that the Indigenous partner is there saying what they need, saying what they want, and we'll be responding, not the other way around.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so the floor is still open for other questions related to either Mike's presentation. Another one. The floor recognizes Chief Bruce. Yeah.
Bonjour. Bonjour, Kakana. Gayayak, Mamo Abiak. Name Bruce Achimilishkum. This is a cast. Most totem. Martin Falls First Nation Donji. Hago King is an Ekate. Ge Quadjomang. Miigwech Kakana Gay doesn't do shak nongum. Miigwech Kitanad Gawin Ma Chichunia Que Bijach Gawin Ma. Thank you, Anne Scotton, for your words today and using Martin Falls as the example of swift action. And I want to thank you for the prompt response by Indigenous Services Canada with the assistance that we needed with our critical infrastructure piece in the community. As you know, Martin Falls has one of the communities that has been on the boil water advisory for quite a number of years, since 2005. We've been in the boil water advisory. And with that, there are many issues. And, I hope in the future, with the future governments, that, we can turn the page and set a new relationship with government in terms of building and actually planning the infrastructure that we need in communities. With the current systems that we have, they're not proactive enough with the current reporting systems. At one point, there was a fire truck listed in one of our Indigenous Services Canada reporting systems, and it showed that we had a fire truck. But that, in actuality, we had purchased a fire truck, but it never made it to the community. And, and it stayed laid out on the books for many years. And when in actuality, we needed the actual infrastructure of a fire station and a fire truck. And, those kind of services that are available in urban settings, we also need in the community. If there is going to be forest fires and potential forest fires rather in the community to help out with any emergency that may occur. So I just wanted to make a few comments on that, and thank you for your prompt response. Miigwech.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you very much, and also a pleasure to work with you and under terrible conditions and circumstances.
So the floor is still open for any other comments or questions for the presenters. Slowly dwindling in numbers, so. Okay, so I guess we'll close off this part of the agenda. Do you want to make some final comments, closing comments from here? Did you want to make some closing comments? First, bring it all together and, or not really? Yeah, no, for this topic. So I'm going to call upon Grand Chief Derek just to pull this together and close for the day, and then we have Ananias to do the closing prayer.
Yeah, thank you, Chiefs. I know it's been a long, long day and lots of work to do, and I know that this past summer was last summer was extremely hard on Nan with the forest fires. Saskatchewan with the annual flooding. We don't know what's in store for this summer. We had bearskin 2 years ago, so this is very important work that is taking place. Chief Goche, who's taking a lead in that Indigenous partnerships and that comfort. We had scattered communities throughout Ontario last summer, and it was extremely stressful on those families, our peoples. So to be as ready as possible is our top priority, and we're doing our best to ensure that we're ready for this. Hopefully not a bad fire season, but we need to be ready for anything. So thank you for your hard work, Mike McKay and everyone, both levels of government, all those who have played a major role in ensuring that our communities are safe. Those swift responses, thank you for that also to both levels of government. Miigwech. Ananias or Connie?
Thank you, Grand Chief, and now we'll have Elder Ananias Spence close off our day for us.
Yeah, as I said, what's on our cemetery toy? Yeah, he get the yeah, got the bench to time hand, guys, Nick got the Nishnawbe. You got the still off part of me go take it away. You got me got the kid on the casa and on the mango. So I got just still over Gishpin. When Gige going out, Nick it now and we got no that's singing on the man, no and guy got this and got taken in. You got a still geese out and get the way. A guy and you got the kitchen as Chigi Kagwe doesn't got take one. Kawin Dakini got not and gig on Gigi was just got take when you get in a quick got take when in Yana. Where Akos and Gagi on the Mexico and away. Kination and Dagon, you got gig on Gagi. Two got the gig on where no one gig on Gamish, taking no one and got doesn't got digging. You got the stick away, can you just take in where can evening is from a stick. Panky man and the gig got the young spinning and Jan you got kind in the water, you got Chigi to got dig. No one got it doesn't got the Jebang yan jikkedang, nego das vi nottainan jikkedoi, nego das opparin nego jikkedoi. Yep. Nottainan itchisun gaitaan, jadviitten sijaattiukitus nikkaasun, kitokimaawan, kitojutchivan ja kitentomun, kitviittoot sijaatio otaaskin taavaskootsikisukun. Miinenaan anot ja kiisikaaki on se maatsiaan. Voi pentämään maagana niittyinaan iisiepen hoitivan tuotteemitik. Ikaan maagaituttinaan kisikuetsiköök, vai mitä kun mä tsikuana. Vessaakin näkitte pidöisiin kiukemaan, nyt keskihuin. Nyt kitten tausen käike, näistä käike. Amen. Mikäs, thank you.
9:30 sharp. 9:30 sharp.